The corridor of Holman Correctional Facility hummed with a tension that no sound could quite describe. Journalists gathered behind glass panels, witnesses shifted uneasily, and guards moved with solemn precision. It was May 10, 2002, the night Alabama would carry out its first execution of a woman in 45 years. The fluorescent lights flickered against cold concrete as whispers filled the death chamber's waiting area. Lynda Lyon Block, once a paralegal and mother, was hours away from meeting her fate. Outside, protesters held candles, some praying for her soul, others demanding justice for Officer Roger Motley. Inside, a clock ticked loudly enough to feel like a countdown. The moment was historic, but it was also human. Fraught with regret, anger, and disbelief, Lynda sat quietly in her cell, her calmness unsettling to those watching. She had refused to appeal further. The state had spoken, and she would not fight it. The quiet defiance in her eyes told a deeper story, one that began long before this night. In choices made, beliefs followed, and a collision between conviction and consequence that neither she nor Alabama would ever forget. Lynda Block's story was not one of simple villainy. Those who knew her once described a fiercely intelligent woman, sharp, articulate, even compassionate. Born in 1948, she had built a respectable career as a paralegal, devoted to helping others navigate the very legal system that would one day condemn her. But life had its fractures. A failed marriage left her vulnerable and disillusioned, and that void entered George Sibley, a man whose charm masked a deep distrust of government and authority. Together, they spiraled into a shared paranoia, adopting the sovereign citizen ideology that rejected U.S. law itself. To them, taxes were theft, police were oppressors, and courts were tools of tyranny. Friends saw Lynda change. Her confidence hardened into hostility, her kindness clouded by suspicion. The woman who once fought for justice now believed she lived outside it. When George convinced her that the government was the enemy, she didn't resist, she joined him fully. Their union was not just romantic, but ideological, a partnership fueled by fear and rebellion, a storm that would one day explode on an Alabama street. Lynda's transformation was subtle but irreversible. Raised in a disciplined household, she was ambitious and meticulous, thriving in law offices where her understanding of statutes earned her respect. Yet beneath that success lay an emotional fragility few saw. She longed for belonging, for someone who shared her dissatisfaction with life's constraints. When George Sibley appeared, she found not just affection, but validation of every grievance she carried. The two became inseparable, partners in a crusade against authority. They sold possessions, traveled constantly, and refused to use state identification, claiming independence from what they called government enslavement. To outsiders, it looked like madness. To them, liberation. As months turned into years, Lynda's worldview tightened into an unshakable belief. She was not a criminal, but a patriot. Friends and family grew distant, unable to reach her through walls of ideology. Her son, Chris, pleaded with her to come home, but her letters grew colder, written in legal jargon and anti-government rhetoric. She was slipping further into George's orbit, where law was illusion and defiance was survival. It was a path that would soon collide violently with the real world on a day no one could undo. By the fall of 1993, the pair were fugitives from multiple jurisdictions, accused of fleeing unpaid fines and defying court summonses. They traveled through the South in an aging blue car with homemade tags that declared their sovereignty. On October 4, 1993, they pulled into an Opelika, Alabama shopping center parking lot, a decision that would seal both their fates. Officer Roger Motley, a respected local policeman, noticed the unusual plates and approached to investigate. The exchange started calmly, as such stops often do, but tensions simmered beneath the surface. George insisted the officer had no authority. Lynda watched from the passenger seat, gripping a .45 caliber pistol. Witnesses later recalled the scene as chaotic. Voices raised, the officer demanding identification, George refusing, And then the eruption of gunfire. It lasted mere seconds. Officer Motley fell, struck by bullets, his radio crackling unfinished words. Panic filled the parking lot as shoppers screamed and ducked for cover. George and Lynda fled the scene, their ideology now soaked in blood. They claimed it was self-defense. The state would call it murder. Within hours, authorities set up roadblocks across Alabama. Lynda and George were found hiding near Montgomery, exhausted and defiant. Their capture ended the manhunt, but began a far more complex pursuit of truth, justice, and intent. Lynda told officers she had only returned fire to protect George. Police saw no evidence of such. Officer Motley's gun remained holstered, his radio the only weapon he reached for. In custody, Lynda's demeanor chilled investigators. She spoke calmly, invoking constitutional theories and quoting obscure laws, refusing to acknowledge the legitimacy of her arrest. "You have no jurisdiction over me," she said repeatedly. To detectives, it was both absurd and unnerving. Behind her composure lay an unwavering conviction that she was right, no matter what the world believed. For the small Alabama community grieving their fallen officer, compassion faded quickly. They wanted justice. What began as a traffic stop had become a symbol of defiance, ideology, and the deadly consequences of belief taken too far. The interrogation room felt colder than any prison cell. Hours passed as detectives pressed Lynda for remorse, but none came. She didn't weep, didn't flinch. Instead, she lectured them about constitutional rights and freedom from unlawful authority. When told Officer Motley had left behind a wife and children, her expression didn't change. "That's unfortunate," she said softly, "but we were defending ourselves." To prosecutors, this was proof of moral vacancy. To psychologists, a sign of deep indoctrination. The more they questioned, the more she retreated into ideology. Reporters later called her the woman without regret. Yet those who observed closely noted moments small, fleeting, when her voice trembled or her hands fidgeted as if battling unseen doubt. Perhaps she wasn't heartless, only lost within a narrative she couldn't escape. Outside, Opelika prepared for the trial of the decade. The public wanted to understand how a once ordinary woman could justify killing a policeman. The state wanted vengeance. And Lynda, ever composed, demanded only one thing: to be judged by her version of law, not theirs. The trial began under heavy security, cameras lining courthouse steps, reporters filling the benches. Lynda entered the courtroom wearing plain prison attire, her hair neatly tied, her face expressionless. George Sibley sat beside her, representing himself, both refusing legal counsel from the state. The judge warned them repeatedly about courtroom decorum, but their defiance was relentless. "We do not recognize this court's authority," George declared. Lynda nodded silently. The prosecution called witness after witness, bystanders, ballistics experts, and first responders. The evidence was overwhelming. The bullet trajectories, the eyewitness accounts, the recovered weapon matching her fingerprints. Yet Lynda's defense was philosophical, not factual. She argued principles, not events, as if the trial were a debate about liberty rather than life and death. The jury, ordinary citizens from small Alabama towns, struggled to comprehend her arguments. To them, the law was simple. A man had been murdered and someone had to pay. By the trial's third week, the courtroom's air was thick with fatigue and disbelief. The verdict, when it came, surprised no one. Guilty of capital murder. When the judge pronounced the death sentence, silence consumed the courtroom. The gravity of the words hung heavy. Death by electrocution. Lynda stared straight ahead, her eyes distant, as if already elsewhere. Reporters scribbled feverishly. "First woman condemned in Alabama since 1957. The gallery murmured. The officer's family clasped hands, tears streaming silently. The judge spoke firmly about accountability and justice, yet even he looked unsettled as he said her name. Lynda offered no plea, no apology, only a calm statement. "I accept no judgment from this system." That single sentence would echo through the years. Outside the courthouse, public opinion split sharply. Some called it overdue justice. others a tragic symptom of ideology gone mad. Feminist groups debated whether her execution was fairness or spectacle. For Alabama, the sentence reopened a question long dormant. Could the state truly kill again? And this time, a woman. Inside her holding cell, Lynda began writing daily letters to supporters, reflections on freedom and essays on spiritual redemption. Her mind remained a battleground between guilt and justification, faith and defiance. Death row became her new world. Isolated, silent, yet strangely predictable. Days blurred into weeks marked by routines. Early wake-up, sparse meals, and long hours of writing. Lynda corresponded with activists who saw her as a political prisoner, not a murderer. They sent books about government abuse and philosophical liberty, feeding the very beliefs that had led her there. Yet among those letters came others. Pleas from her estranged son, Chris, now an adult, begging her to find peace and let go of anger. His letters were filled with childhood memories, baking cookies, trips to the park, laughter under the sun. Sometimes she responded, sometimes she didn't. The guards noticed her quietness, her refusal to gossip or complain. She kept her space immaculate, her words measured. For nearly 9 years, she lived in that rhythm, awaiting either clemency or death. Rumors swirled about George Sibley's fate, his appeals running out, his own execution approaching. In a system built on time, Lynda seemed outside of it, suspended between the woman she once was and the symbol she had become. As years passed, journalists revisited her story, often fascinated by her intellect and composure. She doesn't fit the profile, one reporter noted. Indeed, she wasn't like the others, no history of abuse, addiction, or poverty. Her crime had stemmed from belief, not desperation. The governor received numerous petitions demanding mercy, each emphasizing her gender, her transformation, or her philosophical confusion. But Alabama's tradition of justice left little room for sentiment. The appeals dwindled, the paperwork slowed, and one by one, every legal avenue closed. Lynda stopped signing petitions altogether. She wrote instead about forgiveness and destiny, claiming she no longer feared death. Guards described her as eerily serene, often quoting scripture. Yet at night, witnesses recalled hearing her weep softly, whispering names no one could make out. Her humanity lingered quietly beneath ideology's ruins. When word came that her execution date was set for May 10, 2002, she neither protested nor prayed aloud. Everything has its time, she told a chaplain, even me. The final days were heavy with unspoken tension. Prison staff rotated shifts quietly, minimizing chatter. The warden held briefings to ensure procedures would be flawless. Alabama's reputation was on the line. For Lynda, the days shrank into moments of reflection. She read old letters from Chris, reread the Bible passages she'd marked years ago, and spoke briefly with her attorney. Though there was nothing left to discuss, she refused all interviews, saying her words had been twisted enough. Outside the prison, protesters gathered under floodlights, holding signs of mercy and vengeance. Justice for Motley stood beside End the Death Penalty. Inside, Lynda packed her few belongings, photographs, worn paperbacks, and a small wooden cross carved by a fellow inmate. She spent her last afternoon in silence, writing one final note, addressed not to the governor or media, but to her son. "Remember me for the good," it read, "and know that love was never absent, only misplaced." When the guards came for her that evening, she rose without resistance. Her last meal was a curious reflection of her state of mind. Unlike many before her who requested lavish platters, Lynda declined a special meal altogether. She asked only for a simple serving from the prison menu, vegetable soup, cornbread, and a glass of water. Some interpreted it as humility. Others saw quiet defiance. "I don't need indulgence to leave this world," she reportedly said. The choice was telling. It wasn't about food, but control. In a system that dictated every moment, she chose minimalism, her final statement of autonomy. As she ate slowly, guards stood nearby, heads bowed slightly in respect. Even those who despised her crime couldn't ignore the strange dignity in her composure. When she finished, she thanked them softly and returned her tray neatly arranged. The clock read 8:45 p.m. Within an hour, she would walk into Alabama's history books. The final preparations began. The official witnesses notified, the chamber checked, the straps laid out. For Lynda, the world had already narrowed to a single truth. The end was near, and she would face it awake. The walk to the execution chamber was short, but infinite in feeling. 2 female officers flanked her, guiding her through sterile corridors lit by buzzing fluorescent lights. She wore a clean white uniform, her hands loosely cuffed in front of her. As they reached the heavy metal door, a faint mechanical hum signaled the machinery beyond. Witnesses sat behind a thick glass window, reporters, clergy, and the victim's family. Lynda scanned the faces briefly, showing neither fear nor arrogance. When asked if she had any final statement, she nodded slightly. "I am at peace," she said softly, her voice steady. "I forgive everyone, including myself." The words hung in the air like smoke, neither confession nor plea, but closure. The warden gave a silent nod, and guards began securing her to the gurney. The straps clicked with a rhythm that felt almost ritualistic. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over Atmore. For a brief moment, time itself seemed to pause, suspended between justice and eternity. At 9:02 p.m., the curtain opened. Lynda lay motionless, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, lips moving in silent prayer. The signal was given, and the electric current surged through her body with a muffled hum. Within seconds, it was over. The doctor pronounced her dead at 9:12 p.m. A hush fell over the chamber. Some witnesses wept quietly, others turned away. Officer Motley's widow held her rosary tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Justice is done," someone whispered, though it sounded uncertain, even hollow. Reporters scribbled the final words of their stories as guards moved efficiently to clear the room. Outside, the prison gates glowed under floodlights, and the crowd dispersed slowly into the warm Alabama night. Lynda Block's body was removed for autopsy, her ashes later scattered privately. The warden released a brief statement. "The sentence of the state of Alabama has been carried out." Yet long after the lights dimmed, questions lingered about belief, punishment, and the fragile humanity within both. Her death did not end the conversation, it reignited it. In the weeks that followed, newspapers debated whether executing Lynda Block had been justice or spectacle. Activists called it a step backward. Critics called it overdue closure. Scholars analyzed her transformation from paralegal to ideological extremist, using her case to explore the psychology of belief. For her son, the execution left a void that no analysis could fill. He described feeling both relief and sorrow, as though losing his mother twice, first to ideology, then to the state. Alabama's legal system faced scrutiny over its use of the electric chair, soon phasing it out entirely. Yet her name remained, etched into the annals of American crime as a chilling intersection of conviction and tragedy. Lynda Block's story became less about crime itself and more about consequence, the cost of delusion, the reach of justice, and the tragedy of a life consumed by belief. In death, she became both cautionary tale and reluctant symbol, a reminder that ideology can be as fatal as any weapon.